one of my favorite hymns, one of my very favorites. Hear these words from the Gospel according to Matthew. And I'm reading from the 14th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew, beginning with verse 13. This will be a story that's very familiar to you, but there are four different accounts of this in the four different Gospels, and each one's a little different from the other. So listen as though you didn't know exactly what was going to happen. When Jesus heard about John the Baptist has just been beheaded, as we go into this part of the text. When Jesus heard about John, he withdrew in a boat to a deserted place by himself. When the crowds learned this, they followed him on foot from the cities. When Jesus arrived and saw a large crowd, he had compassion for them and healed those who were sick. That evening, his disciples came and said to him, "This is an isolated place, and it's getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go into the villages and buy food for themselves." But Jesus said to them, "There's no need to send them away. You give them something to eat." They replied, "We have nothing here except 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish." He said, "Bring those here to me." He ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass. He took the 5 loaves of bread and the 2 fish, looked up to heaven, blessed them, and broke the loaves and gave it to his disciples. Then the disciples gave it to the crowds. Everyone ate until they were full, and they filled 12 baskets with leftovers. About 5,000 men, plus women and children, had eaten. May God bless this reading and hearing of the Holy Scriptures. God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. So, are you hungry? How many had breakfast? Okay, not everybody. So we need to remember that there are hungry people in this room, right? Really, we're here because we're hungry. But if we're hungry, wouldn't we run down to McDonald's or maybe even just keep going and go to Cracker Barrel and have a real breakfast? When I was a superintendent, I would, in the Abingdon district years ago, I would sometimes try to visit 2 churches on a Sunday morning, and that's a pretty spread out rural territory with lots of little towns. So sometimes if I was going to be in Marion, for example, I'd go early and go to the McDonald's and order and sit in the parking lot and watch who's there on Sunday morning when a lot of us are going to worship. Or sometimes if I was going to be in Bristol, I would go to the Walmart parking lot and I would sit there for 20 minutes or so. Who goes into Walmart on Sunday morning at almost worship time? It was amazing how many families I saw that I would have loved to get out and say, "Do you have a church? Do you know the stories of Jesus this morning? Do you think your children may need the kinds of teaching they get in a faith family? Do you think you might be hungry for hearing stories about Jesus, knowing what Jesus can do in your life to make a difference, knowing that he's already there and you just can be so full by accepting him? I wondered if they knew that they were hungry for God instead of the stuff in Walmart or the food at McDonald's. I would think of that scripture. What parent would give their child a stone instead of fish? But it's a question I had to live with in my own life as well. We are here because we know we are hungry for God. I can't tell, this is the first time I've been to in-person worship since the second Sunday of March. And I wasn't prepared for how emotional I would feel just being here. I was hungrier than I even knew to be with others in a time of worship. If we ask each other, which we never would we? Are you here because you're hungry for God? You might get a variety of answers, because it's hard for us to admit that we're hungry. But we come because we've heard rumors of, or we've experienced in our lives, a God who feeds the deepest hungers and fills the soul. We've heard other stories, but the one from today's text says of the crowd, all were fed and filled. All were fed and filled. People who come to Jesus are filled and satisfied. The only one of Jesus' miracles that appears in all four Gospels is this one. And in fact, it was so important to Matthew that there's another story just a couple of chapters over of the feeding of the 4,000 twice. They felt this was an important story for us to hear, and so important for us to reflect on again today. You see, Jesus had just received word of the death of his cousin John. And you know how that feels. You know grief. And you understand how it takes over that day and takes over all of your thoughts and your feelings. And Jesus had just come a couple of days from Nazareth, his hometown, where they had rejected him. They had questioned where he got his authority. They had said, "You're just Mary and Joseph's boy. Who do you think you are coming here acting like you have all this authority?" And Matthew tells us he was not able to do much there, and said, "A prophet is without honor except is not without honor except in his hometown." So after that disappointing time, and then hearing of John the Baptist, don't you reckon Jesus was overcome with tiredness and with grief and with wondering, is this the way this journey is going to be every day? Is it going to be this disappointing? So he goes away to a deserted place, exhausted and needing time to refill, to recharge. So in the middle of nowhere, he goes to find that kind of refilling. He was a man of retreat, wasn't he? When he realized he needed to recharge. A good example for us to follow. But the crowds followed him. And he had compassion on them, Mathew says. He looked at them, had compassion on them, and healed them. They were hungry, not for food, but for other things. When I was at my last parish appointment at First Church Maryville, we and the Presbyterian Church partnered and started a feeding program called the Welcome Table. And that was just what it was. We welcomed anybody who wanted to come. And we knew there were hungry people in Blount County, but you don't see them necessarily in Blount County when you walk around. And so the idea in the beginning was to feed the hungry. So we did it in a way where we set up the fellowship hall like a restaurant, and we asked volunteers to give 2 hours a month to come and work. So they might come and prep the food, or they might come and set up the tables, or they might come and be servers. So each server had a table and people were waited on, their food was carried to them, they were treated like royalty when they came. What we discovered was that there was a whole range of hungers that brought people. There were people who came because they were out of food stamps and couldn't buy food. There were people who came because they were living in their car and it was wonderful to have a hot meal. There were those people, but there were also as many people who were lonely. People who lived in isolation where they didn't see people during the daytime, or maybe once a week they saw people. And they were lonely. They would come and they'd make friends. And they would start calling and caring for each other. It was amazing to see the different kinds of hunger. Some of them came because they needed to know somebody was aware and cared about who they were. And I can imagine there were all of these various hungers in that crowd that Jesus faced. And he had compassion. He healed them. And then he fed them as well. So we step into the story, first of all, as a part of that crowd. If I'm one of the crowd, there that day with Jesus, I'm standing in an isolated place, but I'm also standing in a desert place in my own life. I think if there's anything that describes the way our world is rocking right now, it might be wilderness. We are in the wilderness and nobody seems to know the way out. And that's the kind of people Jesus was facing. And if I'm there, I have a wilderness in my own life too, a place that I don't know the way through. I'm hungry for this one who's driven in his life by compassion. And I'm able to say, have mercy on me, Jesus. Have mercy on me in my life. Fill my empty soul. Help me meet the challenges that I can't meet on my own. Heal my hurt. Heal my body. Heal my relationships. Heal our world, our country, our church. Bread of heaven, feed me till I want no more. We sing that. Bread of heaven, fill me till I want no more. So as a part of the crowd, there we stand with those kinds of needs and hurts and wants and cares in our own lives. And we come to Jesus. We come to Jesus. And we bring those. It seems to me as I look at the story that this is where Jesus is and where the crowd is, caught up in a powerful time. Can you see that in that story? Jesus and that crowd are with each other, and the Spirit is so present there as Jesus moves through that crowd of speaking, healing, listening, working with them, that it's such a powerful moment. It's one of those spiritual times where time disappears, where the exhaustion that you brought there and the hurt and the pain and the need that you brought there kind of disappear, and hours become like minutes. It is so powerful that all sense of time disappears and you just are immersed in that powerful time. So, were the disciples alerted by their stomachs growling that something needed to be said? Or did they notice the sun was going down and panic about where they were going to sleep that night? Or did they have their cell phones set at quitting time and their cell phones started going off? They didn't have those, but that's what we'd be doing. For some reason, whatever it was, they decided it was their duty to call Jesus' attention to the hour and bring him back into the practical things. Not this spiritual high that everybody was on, but back to the practical things. It's getting dark. We're in the wilderness. These people need to go to the villages or home and get something to eat and be home before dark. We can't keep them out here like this. Jesus said, what? No need to send them away. You give them something to eat. Do you wish you could have seen the disciples' faces when Jesus said that to them? To look out at 5,000 plus people. I mean, it's bigger than a Donald Trump rally. And Jesus said to them, you feed these people. You feed these people. Jesus, I don't know what you're talking about, but that sounds like crazy stuff to me. But Jesus was serious, and they got the drift. So they said, now, think about this, Jesus. All we have is 5 small loaves of bread and 2 fish. What do you want us to do with that? And he said, bring it to me. Bring it to me. And so they did. They brought it to Jesus. But just for a minute, reflect about how we're like those disciples, how I'm like them, and I'll let you decide if this fits you or not. Most days I feel like I need everything I have just to make ends meet. You ever feel that way? Some days it feels like we scarcely have enough for ourselves, and we're not about to give it away. And not only that, but I some days feel like my time. Everybody's wanting my time, and I'm barely making it doing what I'm doing now. So don't ask me to do anything else. I don't have anything left in here to give. I scarcely have enough time for me and my family. Sometimes we feel that way about our talent, don't we? I'm doing all I can do with what God's blessed me with. Don't ask me to give it away. I'm at my limit. So send everybody away who's knocking at my door. Over and over again in life, we stand in the shoes that those disciples stood in, surrounded by human need, faced with challenges that are bigger than we are, knowing we don't have the resources on our own. We don't have the wisdom we need. We don't have the wealth that we need. We don't have the strength we need to give anything away. It's all we can do to meet the challenges that we have. So hear the gospel message for people like me and maybe some of you. Jesus said, "Bring it to me. Bring it to me." And when they took that bread and that fish to Jesus as an act of praise, he lifted it to the source of all bread and said, "Thank you, God. Thank you for these 5 loaves and this fish. Praise you for providing this." He looked into the heavens, gave thanks, broke it, and put it back in their hands. And they obediently gave it away, fed everyone, and had an abundance left over. We sometimes call that the kingdom economy. I so often think we have nothing to offer, or not enough to offer, that our ideas are not good ones, that our talent doesn't mean anything or make a difference, that our resources couldn't possibly help, meager as they are. And we look at the needs around us and we feel overwhelmed and we just say, "Send them away." We're already at our limit. We barely have enough for our responsibilities as it is. We feel that way as churches sometimes. Do you ever sit in a church meeting and those are the very kinds of things we say? Jesus says, "Bring it to me. Bring it to me." When we put things in Jesus' hands, the equation changes. We can dream bigger. We can trust bigger. We can hope bigger. We can think bigger. Jesus says, "Bring it to me." And in his hands there is thanks, there is blessing, there is sharing, there is not scarcity, but enough to share. I had these 2 women at a former church who used to have a little contest going about who was most prepared with the things they had in their purse. They carried these big purses. And you could ask for most anything and they'd dig in there and find it. And they tried to outdo each other on that. We carry, kids take backpacks to school to be prepared. We have purses, we have wallets. We try to be prepared when we go out. But Jesus says, "Bring it to me. Give it to me. Give me your thoughts. Give me your dreams. Give me your resources, your time, your voice, your words, your questions, your doubts. Give it to Jesus. Trust him with it." The miracle of much out of little comes at the hands of this one who is driven by compassion, who gives thanks over what we call meager, and it becomes abundance. Jesus was tired and grieving and didn't have enough for anybody else. And yet when the people came, he had compassion and reached one of the high spiritual moments of his so far journey. I read a story in what is the book called A Bigger Table. And this John Pavlovitz, the author, tells a story about going to Nairobi, Kenya, to a refugee camp that was full of children, it was just children. Most of the children were rescued from one of the slums nearby, massive slums. And what he saw when he went there was just miles and miles of interconnected structures of of pieces of wood and scraps of metal hung together, and then naked wires running to provide a little bit of electricity sometimes not. No plumbing. He said when we arrived, the children greeted our arrival with an almost embarrassingly exuberant reception, treating us with an open-handed kindness that I have rarely experienced. Dressed in their best, they danced and sang and embraced us, gave us pictures they had drawn with words of love and appreciation before we ever did anything. He talks about feeling like he was on holy ground. He said, I was meeting Jesus. And then he talks about the next day going through the barracks and seeing how, there were these little bed type things that had been constructed, and one little wooden box by each bed that had a few rags of clothes and one toy in each box by the beds. And he was stopped in his tracks when he saw chiseled on one bed, "This is my bed and I love it." He says, these were our hosts, the welcoming ones spoiling us. These were the battered souls lavishing kindness on us. Out of their meager resources, they created an overflow. They, like Jesus feeding the crowds, multiplied their little so it became an abundance that they shared with us. What a call we have. If you read Psalm 78, it goes through the wilderness experience of the Old Testament. And there's a point at which the people are rebelling and unbelieving and questioning God. And they say in Psalm 78, I think it's around verse 14, can God spread a table in the wilderness? Come on. We are hungry and there's no food. Can God spread a table in the wilderness? This gospel writer and all four of them that repeat this story want us to know God did spread a table in that wilderness with manna and quail and all the way through. God has spread a table in the wilderness. God does spread a table in the wilderness, even in the midst of COVID. God spreads a table in this wilderness, and God will spread a table in every wilderness of our lives. God's abundant love, God's abundant grace is there. So what little we have, bring it to Jesus. Amen. May the grace of Jesus Christ, which is always abundant, rain down upon you this day and all the days to come as we move into another week of life. Blessed to know Jesus, blessed to know each other, and blessed to be a part of this worshiping fellowship. And may all who cross your path this week see Jesus in you. Amen.
Amen.